the idea is a relative pitch ear is one of the most valuable gifts in the world. That and an internal sense of rhythm. If you have those two things, playing music is going to be a much easier activity for you to gravitate towards and gain skill in.
Warning. This episode contains adult language and adult humor.
Since when have trumpet players ever been considered adults?
If you are easily offended by these types of conversations, consider switching to the oboe. Welcome to the Trumpet Gurus Hang podcast. I'm your host, Jose Johnson. My guest for this episode is Bobby Shew. Bobby Shew is the real OG. That's original guru. Bobby is an exceptionally creative improviser and a powerhouse lead trumpet player. But where his stellar talents truly shine is in his role as a problem solver. Bobby's the guy the pros turn to when they run into chop problems or want to take their playing to the next level. Simply put, Bobby Shew's the man. So, pour yourself a big glass, pull up a chair, and let the hang begin. Welcome to this episode of the Trumpet Gurus Hang, and I am joined with the OG, the original guru, the one and only Bobby Shew. Bobby, it's so good to see you, my man.
The original guru. That's hilarious, man. Thank you, Jose. It's really, I'm flattered, man, to be here.
Man, you know, I've been a huge fan of your playing for years. But, you know, I really became fascinated by you when actually Adolfo Acosta is probably the guy who is responsible for this. Adolfo was like, man, you really should talk to Bobby because you guys think the same way. Yeah, I was coming from the martial arts perspective and we were talking about some things about life because you and Bobby would hit it off because you guys kind of process information the same way. And I'm like, wow. And as I really started to study a little bit more, then obviously we've got a couple chances to hang in person. I have really come to respect you so much more because of your approach to life and learning. And I think that's the thing that I really want to talk with you about today is about your personal processes and the things that make you the unique person that you are. So, Let's dive into that a little bit. I mean, have you always had this voracious appetite for knowledge?
I have. I don't know exactly why. When I was born. Well, I'll say this: I was born at a very early age, and I stole that from PDQ, Bach, and all those guys.
Love Peter Schickley.
Yeah, it's Peter Schickley. I think it opens up a book and he says, "I was born at a very early age," but my childhood was kind of unique in that I was a very hyper child, and now I guess I'm a very hyper old man, but my mom probably had a hell of a difficult time with me as a kid because I was very active. And she had, I was, I don't like to blow smoke, but I was a little smarter than the average kid, I guess, in a lot of ways. I learned very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, I was blessed with the ability to have cognitive moments about materials. My mom, trying to handle my energy as a child, my mom always wanted to be artistic in a way, but she was not provided with the environment as a kid and growing up and everything. So she never really developed that. But she got me like at about, I don't know, maybe a year and a half to 2 years old. She got me on the floor with a box of crayons and a big pad and started teaching me how to draw. My mom was not a great artist, but she was a doodler.
Uh-huh.
And if she got on the phone and she got a pencil, and by the time she got off of a half-hour conversation, the phone book had little flowers and
Okay.
curves all around the
Yeah.
edges. She did all that kind of stuff. But she got me drawing at the age of about a year and a half to 2 years old, somewhere around in there. And I did my first oil painting when I think I was 6.
Okay.
And all through school, I won a lot of blue ribbons in state fair contests, school art contests, and things like that for paintings and stuff, And I was pursuing that very avidly. In addition, on the musical side, my mom and I lived. My mom had me out of wedlock, so there was a difficult situation for her, and I was not supposed to live. My mom tried to. Funny thing is, my mom actually. Funny, I never expected to be talking to you about this, but my mom, at one point when she came out and visited us in LA, she sat down and wrote up like about a 15-page history of me from the day I was born. I was born blue, not breathing.
Oh.
And this left ear of mine was torn halfway off. And you can see it sticks out a little bit more than the other one. You can't see it, but the left one's going, I'm over here, But it ripped about halfway down, and they had to, after they got me breathing, I was in my grandmother's house, and they took me in the sink, and this was before ice cubes. They had those big blocks of ice, and they started it up with a pick, throwing ice and cold water on me to get me breathing. That was my first start on planet Earth,
Wow.
And I went through a lot of my childhood with respiratory problems. What they call it? I can't remember what they whooping cough, things like that. I would have to miss school. They put like a plastic thing over my head and pump like this atomizer stuff into the tent, and I'd be laying under this plastic sheet with comic books and a box of crayons, drawing and stuff like that, And that was my childhood. And in addition, I lived in the house with my grandmother and my mom and a couple of aunts, and they liked music. They used to play a lot of 78s, not jazz. They played like about the hippest thing they ever played was there was one Harry James track called James Session, which was I don't remember it much, but they mostly played like Wayne King, Guy Lombardo. My mom liked the great Caruso, Mario Lanza, things like that.
Okay.
And we used to listen on Sunday night to a thing called the Bell Telephone Hour, I think it was called. And it was like, I think it was the New York Philharmonic or something. They played Sunday night an hour of classical music on the radio. This is all before televisions. There were no TVs back in those days. So we'd all gather around in my grandmother's living room, and we'd listen. And I was laying there in my diapers,
Right.
on a little mat on the floor. But I grew up listening to a lot of music, around the house. And, so there was something, I was absorbing something there. I don't know. It took me a lot of years before I realized that one of the things that is very important and in this whole process of developing along the pathway of artistic and creative things is if you're provided with an environment that has those things in it, paintings and music and literature and things of that sort, it has an influence on you. Of course, I mean, that'd be obvious. If you grow up in a baseball family, you're going to fall in love with baseball or something,
Right.
But anyway, to cut to the chase a little bit, I had all these health problems as a kid. And when I was 10 years old, I switched from a parochial school to a public school. And the first day of class, a lady came into the fifth grade classroom and said, would any of you kids like to join the band? And I went, join the band in my head. Right up in the air. And I went, hell yeah, that sounds like fun. And my stepfather, my second stepfather, which is where I got the name Shew, that's not my blood name at all. It was my second stepfather. And he had played the trumpet for a couple of years in elementary school. And I remember there was one in the closet. And he pulled it out one time and tried to play on it and sucked. And he sounded terrible, but I had never seen a trumpet before. So I remembered that. So anyway, I got started on the trumpet at the age of 10 in the 5th grade. And he sat with me and showed me how to buzz my lips, like he told me to pretend I've talked about this before, so this is going to be a bit redundant, but he asked me to pretend I had a little piece of tobacco on the tip of my tongue and just spit it out and go like, and I went, what are we doing? I thought he was going to show me how to play the trumpet. I'm spitting tobacco, But anyway, for whatever reason, I could do it. Then he handed me the horn with the mouthpiece in it. And he put it up to me and I went, and he said, no. Drop your jaw and open that up. And so I went, oh shit, these are easy to play. That was like the first 3 minutes.
Uh-huh.
You dig?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
What was interesting about that, now I can look back after 70 years of playing, and I have students that come to me with setting issues. And one of the big problems with the setting issues is almost everybody I run into plays too tight in here. They play with their lips too close together. They don't control the aperture. And then people don't really understand how that works. Well, I've since studied quite an awful lot of medical journals, and my shelves are covered with anatomy books and neuroscience books and all kinds of stuff, medical stuff. Right. I study an awful lot of that because there's a science underlying what we do. The other thing is that I over the years I've been working with different horn companies and stuff, not necessarily designing instruments, but helping them modify them or improve instruments and stuff. I'm not smart enough to sit down and tell you how to. If you just gave me a pencil and paper and said design a trumpet, I don't know all of the numbers and everything, I mean, yeah. I know it's got to have tubing and valves and stuff like that. But, I mean, to me, I mean, I just try to make and help people improve an instrument so it plays better.
Yeah.
And I've been 46 years with Yamaha now. And that's been not only fantastic relationship, but it's been a great education too, because some of the people with that company, like Bob Malone, for instance, who's a genius when it comes to these things, and that.
Yeah.
The guy it's like he's from another planet. He knows stuff that I don't think anybody else knows. He comes up with things about acoustical physics that he applies, and he's taught me all this stuff. So anyway, back to the point I'm trying to make is that when I took up the trumpet, it started solving my respiratory problems. And the reason for it, it took me 40 more years of playing or so before I sat down with a cardiopulmonology doctor and who told me, and I demonstrated my trumpet playing and the yoga breath and all of that stuff. I took it with a practice mute to his office. And he watched me play, and he put some wires on me and checked out some numbers and stuff. And after I played, he said, that trumpet is why you're alive. He says that thing, it improved your respiratory elasticity of your lung. Mm-hmm. It started to exercise your respiratory system. And so the trumpet is one of the things that why I'm sitting here talking to you today,
Yeah.
That's a very interesting thing for me, in a sense, A lot of people have no idea that I had such ridiculous health problems when I was a kid. My stepfather, Shew, he used to always think I was just a sickly little kid, and he used to get pissed off of some of the problems that I had and wonder, what was going on. But I don't know. He was not a thoughtful, caring person anyway, But
Right. Yeah.
yeah. But anyway, the whole point about it is, Jose, is that you know when I was young and listening to all that music and everything and playing the trumpet, I had such an easy time with the trumpet. It was like a piece of cake.
Yeah.
He taught me how to read. He taught me the fingerings. I remembered it. It was easy. I could sight read immediately. I got the book the first night and I played half of the book before they put me to bed. I went to the next day at elementary school. I went into beginning band, which was in the principal's office. It was 7 people in the beginning band, And I
Yeah.
went into the first day of beginning band, and the teacher was named Joyce Johnson. She was a classical violin player and a viola player or something. And she said, "Oh, did you get the trumpet? Did you get the book?" And I said, "Yeah," but I says, "I'm sorry, I tried to play all of the tunes last night, but my parents made me go to bed." She looked at me like, "What?" So she opened the book to the back. She said, "Did you play this one last night?" I said, "No, I didn't play that one." She said, "Can you play it now?" And I sat, read it, and played it. She said, "Go back to class. You're not going to be in this beginning band." She says, "You come to the junior high school on Saturday morning, you're going to be in the advanced band." Well, I didn't know what the hell she was talking about.
Right.
But I auditioned for the advanced band on Saturday morning and I got second chair. I'd only had the trumpet in my hand for like 20 few minutes.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
The whole point about it, and I thought that was natural, you see, and it took me a lot of years of playing to understand that not every kid I sat next to had that natural skill.
Mm-hmm.
But what the skills were, that it took me a lot of years of teaching and studying and what learning was and so forth, to realize what is it that what is talent?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what is this? Can't everybody do that? What made my journey so easy?
Mm-hmm.
What made that so piece of cake for me?
Well, that's an interesting topic, because that's one that I've been fascinated with for a number of years as well. And the book, I believe, is called The Talent Code. I believe the author is Daniel Coyle. But
Yeah, Joe Coyle, the Talent Code. I know it very
yeah,
well.
that's such an amazing book. And the idea that it's like there is no natural, but there are naturals in a way, that we all kind of have these, because of our experiences, our unique physiology, the way our brains are wired, we may be predisposed to learn things at a faster rate. But especially like the studies that were done in terms of like prodigies and how few child prodigies actually maintain any level of superior abilities as they get older. So it's the learning processes and our abilities to absorb and to apply. And I mean, but on the other hand, it sounds like to me in some ways that you didn't choose to play the trumpet chose you. So that, it's like everything kind of coalesced for you in your life with that instrument. And I think that is a really amazing thing. And that's kind of been a blessing for you and for so many other people.
Well, I think that I've always been glad that he didn't have a tuba in the closet.
An accordion. Yeah.
But it wouldn't have mattered what instrument it was, because I only picked that instrument because that's what he had.
Right.
If it had been a clarinet, I'd have probably been a clarinet player, or whatever. But the thing was that, and we're talking about this talent thing, and the thing about Daniel Coyle's book, and I guess there's an awful lot there's some videos of the Talent Code, and there's Daniel Coyle, even on YouTube, you can hear him speak about neuroplasticity and all of these things, and this is an astonishing discovery in the field of neuroscience, that something as profound as neuroplasticity, that you can go in and restructure and build new habits and made corrections in the way people have developed bad habits from bad influences or bad suggestions or bad teaching or whatever. But the other thing that I wanted to say is, I mentioned this thing about what is talent. And when I lived in Las Vegas back in the 60s and everything, bunches of musicians, we used to sit up till 4 or 5 in the morning sometimes just talking about music and talent and who can improvise. Why can't everybody improvise? Why can't some people swing? And are all people exactly the same? And what's trying to figure out humanity, philanthropy, psychology,
Right.
all these things put together, and we used to discuss talent. Is it genetic? Is it in the genome system? Is it in your if your grandmother was a great tuba player, is that going to help you? And I don't think it has anything to do with genetics. I think it has to do, as I was saying earlier, with environment. That can be a big influence on talent. But there are two things that I think are natural talents. And this is something that I've observed from 66 years of teaching, sort of, the two gifts I think that people can be born with that are going to direct them or make it easier for them to play music are an internal sense of rhythm. So you don't have to count bars. You can feel a measure go by. You can feel 4 measures go by. You can feel 12 measures, 8 measures, 32 bars. You don't have to sit there. Okay, if you have 231 measures rest during a violin concerto, do you have to go 239, 2, 3, 4, 240, 2, 3, 4? Well, wait a minute. No, just listen to the piece of music and know where you come in.
Right.
Okay. So that involves the second gift, which is a good ear. Doesn't have anything to do with perfect pitch, because as a lot of people don't know, it's actually perfect pitch is detrimental more so than beneficial, because we live in a very imperfect world of music.
Oh, wow.
A lot of people don't know that it's impossible to build any instrument in tune on this planet. You cannot build anything. I don't care what it is. And the reason for that has to do with the overtone series. And the reason why we have a tempered scale is, if you go back in history a few hundred years and you listen to the early harpsichords or any kind of thing, the overtone series, until you temper it, they sound out of tune. If you listen to, we were able now to go back and listen to some sort of a musical group in the 1400s or 15th, 13th, 14th, 15th century, you wouldn't like it because it would be so erratically out of tune. It would sound like, yeah, what the hell's going on? Tune that. But see, they didn't know how to tune it up until they figured out how to temper the scale, and that's like acoustical physics kind of thing. But you get into overtone series, and the first overtone partial is an octave and a third away above. Wait a minute, if you played like a low C and then a E, an octave and a third above, that E is going to be out of tune in relationship to that C, and it's like, so there's this whole thing. But an ear is relative pitch. That would be like, you could have ba ba da ba 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 ba. So let's take that lick. It doesn't matter what note I start on. I can play that lick by ear.
Right.
I could push down any fingering on the trumpet and play that lick. Maybe not, anthropology or a straight note chaser, but I mean, there are fingering patterns that we have to learn. But the idea is a relative pitch ear is one of the most valuable gifts in the world. That and an internal sense of rhythm. If you have those two things, playing music is going to be a much easier activity for you to gravitate towards and gain skill in. It's the person who plays strictly visually rather than auditory. Everything is like looking at a piece of paper and saying, "Oh my God, I hope I don't miss a note." That's the big flaw in music education anyway, is that if you go back in history far enough, hundreds of years back, when we had court trumpeters and so forth, and a court trumpeter there was an entry of a king and queen visiting, and the trumpeter had to put on his feathered hat and his tight pants and go up there and play a fanfare. And if his chops were not in good shape, or if the blacksmith hadn't made him a good mouthpiece,
Yeah.
or whatever, and the guy gets up there, if he plays a horrible fanfare, it embarrasses the empire, So they used to, I remember an article in ITG years ago that they talked about that some places they used to actually decapitate the court trumpet player for a poor performance,
Yeah.
And so I think the whole fear of missing notes came from the fact that, you want to kill the blacksmith for making you a shitty mouthpiece or something like that.
Yeah, social conditioning with that, I guess,
Yeah, but see, music education has this constant fear of the issue of right and wrong, which is so deeply embedded as a contra-survival, pro-survival thing down inside of each and every one of us, goes back to primordial times,
Right.
I mean, we're not fighting pterodactyls. I mean, those things were gone a long time before Neanderthals and Homo erectus and Homo sapiens came around. Dinosaurs were gone a long time before we were here,
Yeah.
We're not worried about dinosaurs, but we had to try to survive. And so we have this right wrong issue going on. And the minute you are made wrong by a band director for pointing, "Bobby, that's an A flat, not an A natural," or something in front of the flute player who you want to date, or something like that,
Right.
it creates a wrong reaction in the brain. The amygdala dominates you don't get the cerebrum, the positive parts of the cerebrum, cerebellum in the brain. You get the amygdala, which is the fear,
Right.
fight or flight thing. And what it does is it stimulates a whole bunch of the wrong kind of adrenaline, and you're nervous and you're freaked out, and you're trying to play a horn, and you're trying to find joy and spirituality and everything in the music. And then there's this looming over your head is this fear of making a mistake.
Right.
So yeah, I've all the years of teaching, I get so pissed off about the musical education system in the schools. And I mean, it's a contagion of aberration, they call it. It's like a disease that goes from one generation to the next. And it's not that people are evil or anything like that. It's just something that it's a habitual kind of attitude that permeates our whole field. And the next thing you know, it's like all the kids in the band room they're like terrified about missing a note instead of just, loosening up and having a fun time. And what the hell is the big deal about missing notes? It's like, it's Shakespearean to err is human,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's we, like you're saying, societally, we kind of have developed this aversion to making mistakes or to failing. The failure has it's a bad word. It's a 4-letter word. But that's the only way you learn. If you never screw up, if you never lose, if you never fail, you really never learn. The greatest lessons are from the things that we can't do. So I think that kind of mind shift is critical. But the problem is, it's the dark side of the habitual tendencies of the brain. The reason we have habits is to make it easier for us to do things. That we save the processing capabilities. When something becomes habitual, we don't have to think about doing it; we just do it, and that's a great thing. But when the habit's no longer serving us, then we become a slave to that dogma that we've created. And I think, like with the educational system, whether it be music or just education in general, what served us 10 years ago, let alone 100 years ago, no longer serves us in the same way. So I think the inability, the inflexibility, the unwillingness to look at something and say, is this really working? And if it's not working, if it's not giving me the results that I want or need, what do I need to do to change it? And be willing to embrace that change, not as something that thinking, oh, I was wrong then. No, you were getting the results then. You were right then, but things have changed. So you need to change to meet the current needs.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree completely with you. And the other thing it just came to mind while you were speaking was the book you sent me on the mindful stuff. And I quite often talk to my students about things along those lines, that you have three options: the future, the past, or now. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
you know and both the future and the past are actually kind of what we call them illusions,
Hmm.
because they're not real. The only thing that's real is now. Like George Carlin used to do a funny thing. He says, there's a great moment in time I want to tell you about. It's just one of the most amazing. Oh, gee, there it went. Sorry. and, but I tell my students, like, you have three options. When you sit down and you're practicing, for instance, what are you thinking about while you practice? I hope I don't miss a note, because I have this thing next week, and you're not in now.
Right.
You're in the future.
Right.
Or, God, I sucked on this last week when I played this. Now you're in the past. And
Right.
sometimes you bounce between the past and the future. Occasionally you pass through now for a split second while you put some valve oil on or some paint or something. But
Yeah. Yeah.
for the most part, I think the average person, when they sit down and practice an instrument, is nowhere near the percentage of now that they get is like minimal.
Yeah.
And so I really loved that book that you sent me. And as soon as, and Adolfo, who you mentioned earlier, he's like a son to me in a lot of ways. He was here for dinner last night, as a matter of fact. And but when he saw that book, and he says, "Oh, Jose, I didn't realize he knew you and all that." But anyway, years ago, I read a book by a saxophone teacher. I don't remember his name or even the name of the book, but it had to do with, was talking about how to practice,
Mhm.
And I always like to read what other people say about things. I like other people's opinions. I don't always agree with their opinions, and I sometimes read some things that people say that are pretty stupid. Hey, don't eat my house. I got two new puppies, man, and they're like
Ah.
going crazy. They think the house is made of dog food,
It should be. Yeah, it should be. Yeah. Just remember, Bobby. Like they say, opinions are like assholes, right? Everybody's got one, and most of them stink. So,
I okay. So, but what I wanted to say is that this book, he was talking about a little kind of a yoga breath. Now, of course, me and the yoga breathing and all of that, and
right.
I have, and my respiratory system issues that we've talked about earlier. And I have so many books on meditation, and I've done that. My wife and I used to meditate and do things like that, and Tai Chi, and we did all kinds of stuff, when we when we could bend our legs and stuff like that. But in this book, he talked about a quick breath. It's like in the value. I don't know. Have you ever read this book called Breath by James Nestor?
I have not. I'll have to check that out.
Well, what it is, I mean, not necessarily telling you should read it, but James is a guy that had respiratory problems as a child, and he grew up. And I'm reading this book, and I'm saying, this is a book about me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he went through childhood respiratory problems, and he, as in his years later, he kept going to different gurus in the Himalayas and different places, you know, Hindu, whatever's, and learning different kinds of methods of breathing and all of this and so forth to try to straighten out his life, his health. But there's an awful lot of talks about nasal breathing, the value of breathing in intake through the nose.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, it goes back to the history of the human race. If you go back far enough and look at the evolutionary line of humans, and I don't know, this is just taps on a thing. My wife and I did several genome tests, the different ones. We've done National Geographic, Ancestry, and 23andMe. 23andMe was the best one.
Okay.
Because it's the most specific. But I got back, and I even have it. I saw it just yesterday. Like, you get all these reports.
Oh, you're a Neanderthal.
I have Neanderthal roots. Yeah, 2%. But if you go back far enough to Neanderthal, and then Homo erectus, which precedes Homo sapiens, and you look at in this book, he talks about the evolutionary line of the shapes of the body. The nasal thing was, if you go back to the apes and things from which we come, look at the noses on gorillas.
Right.
Chimpanzees, they're huge.
Mm-hmm.
Huge nares in there, you know, because respiratory nasal breathing was so absolutely important to survival that will you guys stop fighting? Dogs. They're unbelievable. Anyway, the over the period of through evolution, our noses have shrunk.
Okay.
You know, and we don't have the clarity of nasal passages. We have deviated septums. We have all kinds of things, you know. When I was young and the respiratory problems that I had, they had to cut out my tonsils and the what do they call them?
Adenoids?
Adenoids, yeah. I started to say androids. That were, oh no. Adenoids and tonsils, they cut them out when I was about less than a year old.
Wow.
The respiratory problems, you know.
Mm.
But anyway, the whole point about it is there's a nice little nasal breath that this guy talked about in there. And it's to take in through the nose, like 5 counts, like 5 seconds, you know, you go, and you silently count to 5. While you do it, you go. And then you hold for 5 seconds, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 3, 4, 5. A little pause. Then you breathe in, count 5, hold, count 5, exhale, count 5.
Right.
Pause a couple seconds. You do this as a drill. And what it does, this breath, it ties in with a meditation kind of a thing. It's a form of a yoga breath, but oddly, it gets you in the moment of now.
Right.
Is what it does. And good breathing habits get you in the now. So I tell my students, before you warm up, do the breath. How many? I don't know, 5, 10, but do it until you feel like, wow, I'm actually here.
Yeah.
Now warm up. And when you do your flutter, lip buzzing, and mouthpiece buzzing, and so forth, to get your whole embouchure and everything set up in your body connected to the horn, it's better to do it in the moment of now rather than worrying about tomorrow or last week, you know?
Right.
So, and then I tell the students that if you start practicing and you start thinking about next week or last week, put the horn down and do the breath again and get back in the moment of now. It's just a little drill. And I remember some other kinds of things I did in some psychology classes where they have you just touch things, you know, touch the desk, touch your body, go touch a wall, oh, there's a chair there. Oh my gosh. Oh, why, look at this. Why, it's a bottle of water, you know? And all
Yeah.
of a sudden you find yourself in the moment.
Yeah.
And if we, hey, take it easy, will you, please? Hey, dog. I got a male and a female, and they're about 4 months old, and they're just going, meow, 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 meow.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
the
know
whole
that.
point about it is that this whole thing about if we could learn the value of being in now for more of our life. Some people, I swear, I don't think they're ever there that I know. They're always walking around like zombies in some space cadet world in another galaxy, even sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, I was having an out of body experience. God, I hope you don't do that while you're driving, for
Yeah.
sake, you know. You know?
Yeah, well, it's
You get the point, though, Jose.
yeah,
Is
yeah.
this is, and I know you know about this because of the mindful thing that you, and yet that you talk about in that book that you sent me. It's you're very onto that, you know, and maybe that's what Adolfo meant. But you and I are on the same plane, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's the with breathing, yeah, the autonomic nervous system. You have you have more than two parts, but the big two are the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And the sympathetic is your fight or flight. That's when the amygdala is getting fired off and everything. And the parasympathetic, that's your rest and digest. And the power of breathing to regulate the balance between those, because you don't want to have your sympathetic completely shut off, because that's what gives you action. So from a practical perspective, that's what's going to keep your awareness up, keep your facility up. If you're playing trumpet, that's going to keep you on your game. But if it's overriding everything else, and that's when the stress and anxiety comes in. The parasympathetic is your ability to just relax and chill out. So when you exhale deeply, that activates the parasympathetic. When you inhale deeply, that activates the sympathetic. So when you have that nice balance of breathing that goes on, then you find yourself in that space where you are in the moment. You're not thinking about the present, or you're experiencing the present because you're not thinking about the past or the future too much. So yeah, for me, people would always say, "Oh, yeah, how do you meditate?" And blah blah blah. Blah. And I'm like, for me, meditation a lot of times is playing. That's a meditation to me, because I'm breathing. I'm trying to be aware of myself. I'm fortunate that I'm not I'm not in LA trying to make a living, playing on TV shows or stuff like that. So I have a little level of flexibility with that, but I can play to enjoy myself, and I can learn and listen and just enjoy that process. So because my breath is activated, because my mind is on the present moment, that's a form of meditation. I don't have to light incense and do any goofy stuff. It's practicality right there.
I find it very interesting, that as I keep going back to this overview of our educational system of the field of pedagogy, as pertains especially to the trumpet, which is the only one I really know the majority about. But there's the human being. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're looking at humanity and the human mind and how it works and how we set up, the parasympathetic and all of these things that you're talking about. But we have this autopilot thing that we need to rely upon.
Right.
So that, because in order to play a musical instrument, all the things that are necessary on the physiological side, for one thing, and then the acoustical things that are properties of you dealing with resonant factors in your instrument and so forth like that. And you put all of those things that are necessary to comprehend in order to play, you can't possibly be consciously thinking about the things.
Right.
But you would explode,
Yeah.
But the one of my biggest, kind of complaints, I guess, and frustrations is because I've been, so many years involved in what I call teaching, but I don't like to even use that word because I'm not so sure there is really such a thing as teaching. Because I wrote a big article that I probably should send you. It's called Teaching versus Learning.
Mm-hmm.
And what's important here is learning. It's the input and assimilation of the information and the cognitive moments that a person has, that the
Right.
recipient has.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, is the pitcher more important than the catcher? I mean, but in the process of so-called teaching, it's you have so much opinions that are dominant and very little factual science that is passed on. And the average trumpet teacher knows very little about the science of the body, about what a muscle is, how it functions, what tendons are here and there, how the respiratory system, what did people say, oh, the diaphragm is a muscle. Well, it's not really. It's a form of a gigantic membrane. It's got some muscle parts to it,
Right.
but it doesn't, like a muscle. You can't exercise a diaphragm and make it swell up like a bicep or anything like that. You can't do that. And the diaphragm, it has a particular function.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't understand that and the respiratory system, and I hear interviews with people talking about playing, they say, well, air is not really that important, I said, no, I guess an automobile can go, you can drive it down to the grocery store without any gas. I don't fucking think so.
Right.
It is the fuel that generates any action. And
Mm-hmm.
our bodies need two things, air and water. Those are the two primary things. And you can survive on good, clean air and water. You can survive a long time without food.
Right.
And, and the thing about it is, how many trumpet teachers out there know the respiratory system or can talk about it, or what a diaphragm is, or what the rib excursion factors are with how, and I know people who say, oh, you got to push your belly forward towards your belt buckle when you play a note. Well, absolutely. That's one of the quickest ways in the world to generate a hernia, because you're going two directions. You're trying to push the air upward and out. At the same time, push your belly this way. Well, this is the support mechanism down here.
Right.
In that core area, if you activate the core area, it's like a master switch for the thorax.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do is, people talk about diaphragmatic breathing. Well, that's more for vocalists than anything,
Mm-hmm.
and using the larynx. But what we don't use the larynx. We bypass it, and we're using what's called thoracic breath, not diaphragmatic breath. And we're using it's kind of a whole body thing. You're not worried about your toes and the heels of your feet when you play a trumpet. But, if you hooked up electrodes to somebody like Wayne Bergeron's feet, you'd probably find that the muscles in his feet are probably doing a little bit of that when he does play.
Right.
Who knows? I mean, we don't need to go and measure our feet, but the point about it is, it's not just people who do not understand how the body works at the optimum level play from up here. And almost everybody's playing high and shallow up in the upper part of their body. And they get embouchure problems, and they get facial this and that, collapsing, air leaking out the sides. They don't know how to pick a mouthpiece. They pick the wrong equipment because the equipment is trying to compensate for the failures in their body to function properly,
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm forever grateful that 46 years ago, when Maynard Ferguson gave me that book on yoga breathing, The Science of Breath, Yogi Ramacharaka, when he gave me that book, and I started, and Bud Brisbois showed me how to use it. And then a doctor who was studying with me, I said, good God, Doc, what's going on with this breath? Why does it work like this? And he said, read this book. And he gave me a book on respiratory system from medical school. And I went, what? The whole book? And he said, it won't hurt you. So, I did. And that's the beginning of, that's why I have hundreds of books on medical stuff. I mean, I think I have pretty much every anatomy book that's published, I mean, and once you start reading them and stuff like this, you get facts. And so my whole game as a teacher, is to try to separate fact from opinion in the field of teaching. I don't tell people how to play the trumpet. I show them the tools so they can go in the practice room and understand what has to occur for them to be able to play the way they want to play.
Right.
I mean, I'm not trying to predetermine somebody's voice, but I don't know. I get very frustrated sometimes, Jose, with I listen to interviews with people and they're famous players, but they really don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And, there's all kinds of processes that people use and about airstream and about centering notes and bending notes and all this. And I come down to a couple of simple premises, one of which is practical application. If you do something in the practice room that doesn't exactly apply to how you play, you're teaching yourself something that has no application on the bandstand. I mean, it's like, if I did something that does not, that is opposite of what I need to do when I play, I've got a conflicting set of neuromuscular habits in the brain. And so when I go to play, does the stamp note bending thing creep up all of a sudden and I lose the center of my note, because I'm trying to lower the pitch with my chops? I don't agree with that. Jimmy Stamp was a beautiful man, but I think people need to analyze from a scientific point of view the exact purpose behind all of the actions that you tell somebody to do. If you cannot tell me the purpose of it, what it's doing, then wait a minute, let's question whether it should be applied or not. You can have people like, put on a funny hat or sit on an apple when they play, but it doesn't have anything to do with play.
All right. Well, are you familiar with Bloom's taxonomy?
With what?
Bloom's taxonomy.
No,
It was a method that was basically it's like a framework for evaluating educational goals and outcomes. Is like mid 50s, I think it came out 56, something like that. It's been revised, and it's kind of a standard way of approaching the structure of developing educational content. So they revised it in 2001, and the taxonomy is that it's remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create, and that should be. In using this taxonomy, those are your objectives. You want your student to first be able to remember what we're telling them, but remembering is just, it's just the information there. Understanding is developing a cognitive level of knowledge, but that third step, that apply, if you can't apply the knowledge, then it's useless. Then the analyze, you have to be able to break it down. That's the thing you're saying, why does this work? Does it really work? Does it work in all these situations? Evaluate is to take a non-judgmental, more of a scientific approach to things and evaluate the worth, the risk reward, things like that. And then the ultimate is the create, to how do you put this together to make something that is new? And it's kind of like Clark Terry used to say, imitate, assimilate, innovate, and that's a very similar kind of concept. And I think that, like you're saying with the educational thing, we've become so much beholden to tradition and dogma. This is the way I was taught. This is the horn my teacher played, and this is the horn that I play, and this is what you're going to play. And nobody really wants to understand. They don't want to analyze, and that's one of the things that I really love about you, is you. Yeah, every time I've talked to you, every time I talk to somebody who has talked to you, it's you're learning something new every day. You're always looking to question what you know by you challenge your assumptions to create a deeper understanding. And I think that so many people they're afraid to do that, and that's the thing that's holding them back. And I mean, how do you approach that in your, especially like in your teaching? You know, again, here we go, the teaching thing. Your mentoring of people, your guiding them towards their own deeper knowledge of who they are and what they do on the horn. You know, how do you encourage people to get into these kind of steps of critically evaluating the validity of what they're doing, and helping them to develop their own understanding and approach to their craft?
Well, I think the bottom line and the answer, that's a huge question and everything, but how I always revert. I've learned over the years that everything in the physical universe comes down to science.
Hey, thank you so much for hanging with us today. This podcast is all about creating connection through our mutual love for the trumpet life. I hope that you learned a few things about today's guest and had some laughs along the way. Don't forget to give us a review. We love those 5-star ratings. And please share this podcast with your friends. We want to see our hang grow for show. Have a suggestion for a future topic or a guest? Hit me up at thetrumpetgurus@gmail.com. Our opening theme was written and performed by Lexi Signor, and all other music comes courtesy of The Greatest Funeral Ever. So in the words of W.C. Handy, life is like a trumpet. If you don't put anything into it, you don't get anything out. So go out there and let your trumpet sound. And I'll see you at the next hang.